In January 1972, a bomb exploded aboard Jet Flight 367 at 33,330 feet over Czechoslovakia. The aircraft disintegrated in mid-air. All 28 people aboard were killed instantly, except one. Flight attendant Vesna Vulović, pinned inside the fuselage tail section, fell more than 6 miles to Earth and survived. She holds the Guinness World Record for surviving the highest fall without a parachute. But the real story, how she survived, what happened afterward, and the political conspiracy that surrounded the incident, is stranger and more fascinating than the fall itself. Vesna Vulović didn't want to be on Jet Flight 367. The 22-year-old flight attendant had just started working for Jet Yugoslav Airlines weeks earlier. On January 26, 1972, she was scheduled for a different flight, but another flight attendant named Vesna had requested the day off. There was confusion in the scheduling office. 2 flight attendants, both named Vesna, and Vesna Vulović was assigned to Flight 367 instead. "I wasn't supposed to be on that plane," she told journalists years later. "It was a scheduling mistake. Someone else was supposed to fly that day." Flight 367 was a routine domestic route, Stockholm, Sweden to Belgrade, Yugoslavia, with a stopover in Copenhagen. A DC-9 aircraft, a workhorse of European aviation in the 1970s. Nothing about the flight suggested anything unusual would happen. The flight departed Stockholm on schedule. Vesna and the other flight attendants went through their standard routines, checking passengers, preparing for service, going through the motions they'd performed countless times in training and on previous flights. Vesna was working in the rear of the aircraft, near the tail section. She was checking on passengers, making sure everyone was comfortable. Just another day at work. At 4:01 p.m., while the aircraft was cruising at 33,330 feet over the village of Srbska Kamenice in Czechoslovakia, a bomb exploded in the forward cargo hold. The explosion ripped through the aircraft's structure. The DC-9 broke apart instantly. The wings separated, the fuselage split into multiple sections, seats and passengers were ejected into the sky. The aircraft went from a functioning airplane to scattered debris in seconds. 27 people died immediately. Some were killed by the explosion itself. Others were ejected from the aircraft and fell to earth. A few remained strapped in their seats as those seats tumbled through 6 miles of sky. Vesna Vulović was pinned inside the tail section of the fuselage as it separated from the rest of the aircraft and began falling. She has no memory of this. Her last memory before the explosion was checking on a passenger. Her next memory was waking up in a hospital weeks later. Everything in between, the explosion, the fall, the impact, is a complete blank. Medical experts later explained that her brain essentially shut down from trauma, protecting her from memories that might have been psychologically devastating. She fell more than 6 miles and has no memory of it happening, which is probably for the best. The tail section of the aircraft, with Vesna inside, fell to earth and crashed into a snowy mountainside. The section hit trees, which broke the fall somewhat, then impacted the ground at an angle that helped dissipate the force. A Yugoslav man named Bruno Henke was walking in the forest when he heard the crash. He ran toward the sound and found wreckage scattered across the hillside. He began searching for survivors, expecting to find none. Then he heard a woman's voice, speaking weakly in Serbian. "Help me! Please help me!" Henke found Vesna trapped inside the wreckage, critically injured but alive. Her spine was fractured in multiple places. Her skull was fractured. Her legs were crushed. She was bleeding internally, but she was alive and conscious enough to speak. Henke had medical training from his time in the military. He immediately stabilized Vesna as best he could, preventing her from moving and potentially severing her spinal cord. Then he ran to get help. Vesna was rushed to a hospital in the Czechoslovakian town of Česká Kamenice, where doctors were shocked to find a patient who'd fallen from 33,000 feet. Initially, they didn't believe the police reports. Surely there was a mistake. Surely she'd been on the ground when the plane crashed. Surely no one could survive that fall. But the evidence was undeniable. The tail section had fallen from cruising altitude with Vesna inside. She'd survived a fall that should have killed her instantly. The medical team worked frantically to stabilize her. She'd broken her skull, both legs, 3 vertebrae, and several ribs. She'd suffered a fractured pelvis and multiple internal injuries. She was in a coma. For 27 days, Vesna remained unconscious. Doctors gave her family low chances of survival. Even if she survived, they said, she'd likely be paralyzed from the waist down due to her spinal injuries. She'd probably have severe brain damage. Her quality of life would be minimal. On day 27, Vesna woke up. Her first words were reportedly, "Where am I?" followed quickly by, "Where is everyone else?" Medical staff had to tell her that everyone else on the flight had died. She was the sole survivor of JAT Flight 367. Vesna's recovery was agonizing and long. She spent months in the hospital, undergoing multiple surgeries to repair her shattered bones. Physical therapy was excruciating. Learning to walk again with a fractured spine and crushed legs was a process measured in tiny, painful steps. But she did recover. Against all medical predictions, Vesna regained the ability to walk. She had a permanent limp and chronic pain for the rest of her life, but she could walk without assistance. The predicted paralysis never materialized. Her doctors called it a medical miracle. The specific circumstances of her fall, being inside the tail section, landing in deep snow, hitting trees that slowed the impact, landing at an angle rather than straight down, had combined to make survival possible, if not probable. But there was something else that helped Vesna survive: her low blood pressure. Medical experts studying her case determined that Vesna had naturally low blood pressure, which meant she lost consciousness quickly after the explosion. Being unconscious during the fall meant her body was completely relaxed, not tensed up. When you're about to impact something, human instinct is to tense every muscle, preparing for the collision. But tense muscles break more easily than relaxed ones. Vesna's unconsciousness meant she was limp during impact, allowing her body to absorb the shock without breaking as many bones as would have otherwise occurred. In other words, the same low blood pressure that made her pass out during the fall is part of what allowed her to survive the impact. While Vesna recovered, investigations began into what had caused Flight 367 to explode. The official Yugoslav government investigation concluded it was a terrorist attack, a bomb placed by Croatian nationalist separatists who were fighting against the Yugoslav government. This conclusion was politically convenient for Yugoslavia. The government was dealing with internal tensions between different ethnic groups, and blaming Croatian terrorists justified crackdowns on nationalist movements. But there were problems with this explanation. No terrorist group claimed responsibility. No bomb fragments were definitively identified in the wreckage. Some experts who examined the evidence suggested the explosion pattern was more consistent with a mechanical failure or possibly a military accident, a surface-to-air missile hitting the plane by mistake. Czechoslovakia was a Warsaw Pact nation in 1972, with Soviet military installations throughout the country. Some analysts speculated that a Czech or Soviet air defense battery might have mistakenly shot down the civilian aircraft, and the terrorist bombing story was created to cover up the military error. Vesna herself became a pawn in this political game. The Yugoslav government celebrated her as a national hero, proof of Yugoslav resilience and strength. She was awarded medals, given a state pension, and used in propaganda. But Vesna had no memory of what happened. She couldn't say whether there was a bomb or something else. Her amnesia made her useless as a witness, but perfect as a symbol. The government could craft whatever narrative they wanted around her survival. In interviews years later, after Yugoslavia had collapsed, Vesna expressed skepticism about the official bombing story. "I don't know what happened," she said. "I can't remember. But I've read the reports and some things don't add up. I think there might have been a cover-up." She never pursued this publicly, though. What would be the point? Everyone else who'd been on the plane was dead. The evidence was scattered across a Czechoslovakian mountainside. The truth died with the 27 other people aboard Flight 367. Vesna returned to work for JAT Yugoslav Airlines in 1973, just 14 months after the crash. She couldn't work as a flight attendant anymore. Her injuries prevented her from handling the physical demands. But JAT gave her an administrative position, respecting her status as a national symbol. For the rest of her career, Vesna worked a desk job for the airline. Every day she'd commute to an office, do paperwork and go home. A mundane existence for someone who'd experienced the most extraordinary survival in aviation history. Colleagues said Vesna rarely talked about the crash. When asked, she'd give brief answers and change the subject. The experience was too traumatic, too surreal, too incomprehensible to discuss casually. But she did occasionally speak to journalists, particularly when the anniversary of the crash approached. In these interviews, Vesna was remarkably composed and philosophical about her survival. "I don't feel special," she told one journalist in 1985. "I fell from the sky and I lived. That doesn't make me a hero. I did nothing, I was unconscious. The real heroes are the people like Bruno Henke who found me and saved my life, and the doctors who put me back together." This humility was characteristic of Vesna throughout her life. She never tried to profit from her fame. She didn't write sensationalized memoirs or appear in tabloid magazines. She lived a quiet, private life in Belgrade, working her office job and trying to be normal. But she wasn't normal. She held the Guinness World Record for highest fall survived without a parachute, 330 feet. It's a record no one wants, earned through tragedy. Vesna developed an intense fear of flying after the crash, which is understandable. She never flew as a passenger again. When people asked why she went back to work for an airline if she was afraid of flying, she'd say, "I work on the ground now. I keep my feet firmly planted." She also developed some quirks that her friends found odd but understood. She refused to travel by car on highways. The speed made her anxious. She avoided tall buildings. Anything that involved being high off the ground triggered anxiety. These were manifestations of PTSD, though that diagnosis wasn't as well understood in Yugoslavia in the 1970s. Vesna never received formal psychological treatment for her trauma. She just learned to live with it, managing her anxiety through avoidance and routine. In 1985, Vesna was invited to the United States to receive her Guinness World Record certificate. She declined. It would require flying and she couldn't do it. Guinness sent the certificate to her in Belgrade instead. After Yugoslavia collapsed in the 1990s, Vesna lost her state pension and struggled financially. The airline she'd worked for dissolved. The country she'd represented as a national hero no longer existed. She lived on a small pension in a Belgrade apartment, mostly forgotten by the world. In her later years, Vesna became more willing to discuss the crash and its aftermath. She gave several in-depth interviews in the 2000s, reflecting on her survival and its meaning. "People ask me if I feel lucky," she said in a 2008 interview. "Lucky I was in a plane that exploded. 27 people died. I lived, but I was broken, physically and mentally. That's not luck. That's survival. There's a difference." She also reflected on the randomness of her survival. "It was a scheduling mistake that put me on that plane. If the other Vesna had worked that day, she'd be dead, and I'd be alive somewhere else. Everything in life is random. We pretend we have control, but we don't. Sometimes you fall from the sky and live. Sometimes you don't. There's no reason to it." This philosophical fatalism shaped Vesna's worldview. She became less interested in material success or recognition and more focused on simple pleasures, time with friends, walks in the park, reading books. She'd survived the impossible and emerged with a clarity about what actually matters in life. Vesna Vulović died on December 23, 2016 in Belgrade at age 66. The cause of death was not publicly disclosed, but it wasn't related to her 1972 injuries. She'd lived 44 years after falling from the sky, a full life despite the trauma. Her obituary in international newspapers focused on the fall. "Woman who survived 33,000-foot fall dies." But the people who knew her said that defining her by the crash missed the point of her life. Vesna survived, and then she lived, one friend said. She didn't let the crash define her. She was funny, kind, stubborn, and private. She was more than the fall. After Vesna's death, some aviation experts revisited the case, examining whether her fall might not have been from the full cruising altitude. Some suggested the plane might have descended before breaking apart, or that the altimeter readings were incorrect. But these revisionist theories miss the point. Whether Vesna fell from 33 to 330 feet or only 20,000 feet, she survived a fall that should have been fatal. The exact altitude matters less than the fact that she lived through something no one should survive. Her survival remains an outlier in aviation statistics, a 1 in a million occurrence that combined multiple factors: the way the plane broke apart, her position in the tail section, the terrain she landed on, her low blood pressure, Bruno Henke finding her quickly, and the skill of the medical team that treated her. Change any one of those factors and Vesna dies. She survived not through skill or heroism, but through an improbable combination of circumstances that aligned perfectly to save her life. Modern aviation safety experts study the Flight 367 incident as part of understanding how aircraft break apart and how survival might be possible even in catastrophic failures. Vesna's case influences aircraft design, crash investigations, and emergency response procedures. But for Vesna herself, being a case study or a record holder was never the point. She was just a woman who'd survived something impossible and spent the rest of her life trying to process that survival. "Do you ever wonder why you survived?" a journalist asked her in one of her final interviews. "Every day," Vesna replied, "every single day for 44 years. And I still don't have an answer." Maybe there isn't an answer. Maybe survival at that level of improbability is just chaos, random chance that defies explanation. Vesna fell from the sky and lived because of 1,000 tiny factors that aligned perfectly in that moment. 27 other people fell from the same sky and died because those same factors didn't align for them. There's no moral lesson there, no deeper meaning, just the cruel randomness of survival. Vesna Vulović fell 33 south 330 feet and lived. She holds a record no one else wants. She survived the impossible and then spent 44 years trying to understand why. She never found that answer, but she lived a full life despite the trauma, found meaning despite the randomness, and proved that survival, true survival, isn't just about living through the initial trauma. It's about building a life afterward. The fall took seconds, the survival took a lifetime. And Vesna did both, fell from the sky and then picked up the pieces of her shattered life and built something meaningful from them. That's the real story, not the fall, but everything that came after.